morning. It's December 20th. This is Table Talk with the New Independent Party. I'm Jim Hennager, and I appreciate your listening to these. Today, I'd like to get into the first of maybe 10 different sessions on solutions. The first 10 videos dealt more with how I see the issues, how I see the problems that we're having, and I've laid a foundation to suggest things that need to be involved in any solution. And that's difficult if everybody's not, so to speak, on the same page as to what the problems are or why we're having them. I'm not assuming that everybody's going to be on the same page, but at least what you're going to see are solutions that involve trying to answer many of the issues that I've already presented. So if we're looking at a very complex, very complicated world with many, many problems and a lot of potential to solve them. There's just no way to get around that there's potential to solve them. The problem is, do we have the will, do we have the ability, do we have the leadership to move in a new direction? And I'm arguing, I hope you can understand this by now, that we need new directions. And we need these new directions in several areas. We need to have a political situation where everybody can be involved, where not just a handful or a few hundred large companies and their officers can control elections, can buy elected officials, a few companies that are controlling the economy in their area. And we need to have a new perspective on what it means to be humans here on Earth. I'm going to suggest that what we need are a series of projects that involve not just one country, but as many countries as we can get involved. And the first one that I would like to suggest to you would actually involve almost all the countries on our planet. We need a very macro kind of solution that would involve literally billions of people, raise the standard of living for these people from the bottom up, get them involved in democracy, get them involved in a form of capitalism where they have partial ownership of the enterprise. Okay, so you understand the structure of what I'm suggesting. Now, this isn't a new idea. It's been around for over 100 years. It first came up in the late 1800s by an individual who suggested the name Peace Highway as a way to develop more mass transportation in the United States. This was about the time when the railroad was going across the United States, and he suggested a highway. That really didn't come back into play until maybe the 1950s, when we funded and began to create the interstate highway system in the United States under the Eisenhower administration. And that also was at first suggested to be called the Peace Highway. So that's where I'm going. I think what we need is an international mass transit system that connects all the countries and doesn't have the problems that we see today with air travel. Now, if you've traveled lately, you know on one hand that traveling in the air, take the millions of miles that are traveled by as many millions of people, and it's supposedly one of the most safest means of transportation for mass numbers of people, and statistically it is. However, it's getting to a point where you have to be cautious about what's happening. I'm not just talking about some of the terrorism kinds of things that are happening around the world related to how vulnerable the airlines are, but also just the statistics, the logistics involved with, the airport in Chicago supposedly now has a plane taking off and landing every 32 seconds. And there's been, hundreds of cases of near misses of these aircraft almost colliding on the ground or almost colliding around an airport. So we're becoming congested. And the same is true of our interstate highways. If you're traveling in the Chicago area on Interstate 80, you're surrounded by thousands of trucks. It's just phenomenal how many trucks are on there and how dangerous that becomes when you're, a very small car traveling on an interstate where these very large trucks are traveling 70, 80 miles an hour. So what we need is a transportation system that's at least perceived as being safer, is safer from terrorism, and one that is going to be cost effective, but also will bring us together. So what I proposed in the 70s, I think I first started promoting this idea of the Peace Highway in 1978, is a whole new approach to interstate transit on our planet. Now the Peace Highway has the idea that we would go underground, maybe 60 to 100 feet below the surface, and the most logical place to build these is under the interstate systems. We have interstate systems that are, several hundred yards wide in space, already owned by the government, and there's nothing being used underneath them. And I don't know why it would interfere with vehicles on the surface to go 60 or 100 feet below. And using some new technology, actually this technology is being used now to make tunnels, and we do have some very large tunnel digging equipment. I know that Canada has one that's creating a hole about 50 feet around. I know there's one under Seattle that's building a subway system there that's over 50 feet wide. Those, however, are more like the traditional mole type. They just auger into the ground, and then you got to take the dirt out in the back, and then you got to bring concrete in and create the sides. It's very similar to how they built the tunnel underneath the English Channel, which is some 90 miles long. So what I'm proposing is that we need to fund some new technology, companies to develop a laser type of approach where you have the end result is a hole about 60 feet across, a tunnel, and it's created by lasers out in front that are high intensity lasers that melt the ground material in front of it, right in front of it, to a temperature that turns it into a molten state. And then this system moves around so that as it melts, it actually forms the outer wall. And this outer wall could be anywhere from 6 to 10 feet of this molten lava, and as it cools down, that forms your wall. So you're not bringing dirt out, and you're not bringing concrete in to create the tunnel. It's a system where you could start it and just keep going, in the direction that you need to. Now you're going to have exits and entries off of it that'll come every place you need those, but where they come to the surface, you have the opportunity for a new village, a new city, a new community. And what I'm proposing is that this system goes under existing highways all over the world. We have 4-lane, 8-lane, 10-lane highways almost in all cities now. It's just connecting them to the next city, the next region, the next country, and it's very possible. Like here in the United States, it would come across our interstate system, then it would go underground up along the west coast, across Alaska, and then across the Aleutian Islands, over into Russia and China, and then you'd have them break out to different routes. One could go all the way down into North Korea and South Korea, and another one could go down through China all the way down to Vietnam and Thailand and Cambodia, and then come across Bangladesh and India, and then from India could come through Pakistan and Iraq and Iran and clear over to the Jerusalem area. And then from Jerusalem area it could divide out, and you'd have one going to the north through Lebanon and Turkey, and then across into Eastern Europe, all the way through to that region. At the same time, you'd have another one coming across from the Russia, and it would then come down from Moscow and down St. Petersburg back into the northern part of Europe again, as well as then from Jerusalem it would come down through into North Africa, and then at Africa it would come around so that you'd have a tunnel system around the nations on both coasts, and probably one that would come through the middle of Africa. Then over in Southeast Asia you'd have another one that could come down through Indonesia and underwater, and some of that water is only 100 feet deep there. It could go all the way down to Australia. So literally we could pick up all of the continents except Antarctica, and we could have mass transit systems then running all over the world. And I believe it could be developed so that it would not be as expensive as building highways on the surface, which are millions of dollars a mile. It's going to be expensive. It's going to cost trillions of dollars to build a system. But I think with a 60-foot tunnel, you can get maybe as many as four lanes in a tunnel, all going one way. The outside lane would be an emergency lane, and then the next lane would be for trucks and buses, and then the next lane would be a 100-mile-an-hour lane, and then the inside line might be a 200-mile-an-hour lane. So if you could go 200 miles an hour in a tunnel from Washington D.C. to California, it might only take you a day to make that trip. Now you're going to have vehicles that don't pollute. You're not going to have gasoline engines or diesel engines in a tunnel, because it would certainly cause all kinds of problems. So you're going to have to move to electric cars, and you're going to have to move to vehicles that are computer operated for the most part. So not everybody's going to be able to travel in the tunnel at the beginning, but I see that's the direction we're going. We have electric cars now that can go 100 or 200 miles before they need to be recharged. I see some technology coming that would allow electric batteries to be recharged as you drive, and that would allow, as long as you're driving, you would have the ability to continually recharge the batteries running an electric engine. So you wouldn't have the problem with pollution, and I think you could see that in trucks and buses as well. But this 60-foot wide tunnel also has there's some space at the top, so you could have at least two tubes at the top, and those tubes could have either electromagnetic kinds of or magnetic induction kind of strategies. They may be just like the old penny store had pneumatic tubes, where vehicles inside those might be going 500 or 600 miles an hour. So it could be very possible to be in a nice hotel in New York, and you get into a special elevator where you get into a tube and push the buttons that you want to go to Los Angeles, and down into this tunnel system, and you're going 600 miles an hour. You might get to Los Angeles in 6 hours, and that's much better than going to the airport and waiting for hours to get your flight, and then flying across and then waiting at another airport at the other end. I believe in my grandchildren's lifetime this isn't going to happen overnight. I think it's very possible that we'd have a transit system where you have capsules and off you're going. And it'd also allow you to then go up and across, and you could get into Beijing in, say, 12 hours. You could basically go around the world in 36, 40 hours. So the technology's there. In fact, I believe we may have some speed trains already in Japan and China and in France that are going over 100 miles per hour. They're not using, the old steam engines or coal for energy. So I think it's very possible we'll have the technology to develop the tunnel and develop these transits, in cars and trucks, buses, and capsules. Maybe even in my lifetime, maybe I'll live to be 104 and I'll see it happen. But I think over the next 50 years, these could be around the entire world. Now there's some things that brings up. If you're in a car going 200 miles an hour and you're going across Europe where they have a small nation every few hundred miles, you're probably not going to want to pull off and go through customs every hour or so, or every half hour. So I think what we're going to do, and I can see this developing, although there's some strong resistance to an international ID card, I could see that will come, where you have an ID card, you're given a classification, allow you to get on these mass transits, and it's probably going to be good for the existing aircraft as well. But it says that you have the financial means to pay for it, but you also have been checked and you're not a terrorist. You're not going to create any problems, so you don't have to spend these long lines taking off your shoes and your belt and all of these kinds of things. But in a vehicle, you won't even have to stop. They just pick it up that so and so and so and so have gone across the border, and this would all be computerized. I can see that day coming, and I don't see anything wrong with it as long as those IDs are secure, and you can't steal identities that way. Now there's another aspect of this tunnel which I think would make it very advantageous to the future, is that you're going to have to build your road bed in the middle, so to speak, so you have space below, and in that space below the road bed I could see a very large tube, maybe 4 or 6 feet wide, transporting natural gas, another one for crude oil, another one for bringing water, which is exactly what the Canadians are using their tunnel for. They're bringing water out of the Hudson Bay area down into the interior for irrigation. And I can see any number of countries that could use that kind of irrigation of moving water from from a lake to an area that needs it. But then I see another set of tubes, or another large tube of bringing ocean water, seawater, salt water, and maybe it's going to have to go through a desalination plant on the coast, but I could also see where they could take the salt water into the interior and have a desalination plants, closer to where they need the water. So, when you're looking at those tubes underneath, there's some security things you'd want to be concerned about. We've had problems with these pipelines breaking and leaking. We've had explosions connected to some of them. So I could imagine that as they're put in, these pipes might be made out of heavy plastic, or have some ability to move at the joints a little bit in case there was an earthquake or some movement. But I see that the underneath area, after the pipes are in and the pumps are in and all of those things are working, that these areas would be flooded. And so you'd minimize the kind of dangers that we would need to worry about as far as explosions and that kind of contamination underneath. So imagine a 60-foot across tube, and you have 4 lanes of transportation in that coming from the surface down, and then you have at least 2 tubes at the top that are moving very, very fast, and it's all computerized. Nobody can create a situation where their vehicle is going to slow down or cause an accident. And that's why you have the emergency lane over on the far side, because mechanical things fall apart or break, and you'd have to have that as a reserve. But there's some things about the politics of this kind of transportation system, because we really don't have, other than the airlines, an international system of transportation similar to what we would have with this one, because it could move millions and millions of people all at the one time. And what we're doing is we're moving people, we're moving products, we're moving ideas, we're moving cultures across borders and across continents in a very efficient, cost-effective kind of way that I believe would bring us together. This isn't a strategy to have one nation fight over another. It's a strategy to have all nations involved and all benefit from it. Now, when we're talking about that side of the financing of it, I would very much want to see this be a employee-owned large corporation, and it might be groups of corporations that build this from one country to the other, but it needs to be employee-owned, so that the people that work on it, that build it, that are connected to it and maintaining it and running it, as well as the people that are living in the communities that form off of the path of it, they have invested not only their time and energy, but also ownership in this. And as long as that's a part of this, I think you're going to have people very proud of it and very willing to work very hard and have a very high quality of service connected to it. And I think that's very important. But you're going to have bring in outside investors. Now, what we have going on right now in the world are investors shying away from stocks and bonds, and they're hoarding. Here in the United States, we're a shortage of cash because people are basically hoarding that cash. They're not sure, what they want to do with it, and the banks are not offering any interest. So it's estimated that here in the United States we might have as much as $4 trillion outside of the banks in cash that people are just, not just people, but companies are hoarding this cash. And if you look at around the world, you're probably looking at, as much as 20 or 30 trillion dollars in cash in countries. So you need to provide an opportunity for investors to come into this kind of project, and instead of it being a stock issue that the price goes up and the futures prices are going to be involved, I think it has to be required that the profits are set, and I would see that an investor putting in several $1 million needs to be promised that they would get a guaranteed return of 6 or 8%. Okay, not 20%, not 50%, not 300%, but if they can be assured that they're going to get 6% return, I think trillions of dollars would come to this project. And they would get that from the revenues that are generated from people. It would be a toll road. You'd have to pay to go on this road. But the revenues from the toll road, the people paying to be on it, should give that 6% return. And that can all be figured out ahead of time. But the return to the investors then should equal about 25% of the gross revenues, and you're going to have at least 50% of those revenues going to pay off, and some of it's going to be being paid to the investors on loans, but a lot of it's going to come from government financing, large banks, central banks financing this, and they need to get that money back. So again, maybe it's 6% or 8%. The loans, the development loans are paid back and dedicate, about 50% of the revenue to pay it off, as well as the 25% to the investors, at least 25% that comes back to the employees, and that can go into a profit sharing pool. And I think as things get paid off in one area, one region, they can maybe set aside 25% of it to help build the tubes into other locations. At first, you might have just some main tubes going around the world, but eventually, we have an interstate system here in the United States. You'd expect that, they'd want to see one under Interstate 80 and Interstate 35, but there's a lot of interstates here, and as it develops out over years, there's money there to keep building more tubes and going in more directions. And I think it's going to allow to move into areas like north central Canada, where the population is not very high, but it would allow you to take, develop populations into areas where they might be arid now, or they might be cooler now, but it would allow you to expand your population so that we don't have 80 or 85% of our population within 100 miles of a coast. And I brought up reasons why we may not want to be on the coast, and we may not want to all be in mega cities, which is what's happening now. If you go from, the Boston, Philadelphia, New York, Washington, all the way down to Atlanta and Miami, that's almost one big city now. We need to have strategies to disperse the population into the interior, but that's true of populations all over the world. We might have as much as 80-90% of all the people in the world now within 100 miles of a coastline, and that's very dangerous, particularly if the seas are going to be coming up, or we have the possibilities of tsunamis happening. So it develops some strategies to have people in new parts of the world, and eventually over 50, 70 years, maybe 100 years, we could connect just about every population center, every region, and have this transportation system, as well as moving natural gas and petroleum products and water to these areas at very low cost. I'm also seeing that there's potential here for, you'd have to call it the politics of the system, but when you're developing these kinds of tubes across nations and you're promising the country maybe 25% of the revenue, that's sizable. In fact, in some of these countries, it might be the largest source of income that they would have available to them. So you're giving them the opportunity to grow their own economies. Hopefully that will increase their per capita income and raise the standard of living in all the countries where this goes through. In exchange for doing that, my hope is that this structure, this super transportation system, can also be used to move nations in some new directions. And some ideas that I would like to suggest would be that the nation could get their full 25% if they move to a state where they were not involved in wars or terrorism. And if you were involved in having your soldiers fighting a war, then you'd get less than 25%, maybe 12%, or some kind of formula could be worked out. But you could also indicate that you would get a deduction if you had troops in a foreign country. Here we are in the United States, and we might have troops in 40 countries publicly known, and we probably have troops in 80 countries or 100 countries. So I think that would move us in a direction where the incentive would be to pull back the troops from foreign countries not being involved in their conflicts in a military way. And another one would be budgets. I think you could say you'd get the full amount if your nation had a budget where less than 5% of the budget was going into self-defense. And at times the United States has been as high as 20-some% of our federal budget going into military and intelligence. That's way too high. And if you look around the world, the United States has been investing more money in our military and intelligence than the next 5 countries combined. It leads into this whole thing of wanting to be exceptional, and we're spending the money, but we're spending money we don't have, and it's causing a $18 trillion debt. So I think our priorities are really screwed up on this, and I think by having a system like this and we can agree to it, then I see the possibility that nations might come to a point where they don't spend more than 5% of their federal budget for defense, and everybody, would be on that same playing field. So you're not developing, new warplanes and new missile systems and all of that. That just, in my opinion, exaggerates the conflicts, and it's sort of like playing with matches. You keep handing out matches and firecrackers, and somebody's going to get burned, and somebody's going to get hurt. I feel that is a potential in this kind of system. I know that the war hawks are going to, just flip out on that idea, but I think people have to come to this kind of conclusion, and it can't be by special interest groups, because we know where they're going to vote. They're going to want to continue making money the way they are. But I think people voting can come forward and say, this is reasonable, this is rational, we're not going to spend more than 5%. And in doing that, then they get, the full 25%. But I think some other things that could be involved in that are more on the social issue side. I think we could have clauses in there that say, nations get the full percentage as long as they, are not discriminating. We have countries that are discriminating on age and race and sex, and there's countries that are not allowing girls to go to school, not voting. These are kinds of things that could be brought into this kind of discussion of how this system works. So in a way, we were bringing up the cultures to the same level. And I'm interested in a global civilization that gets along, but it doesn't have to be identical. We still have our differences. We can have differences of music, differences of dress, differences of language, but we have to be able to get along. And to do that, I think we need to have some things in common. I would think it would make sense to have an electronic money system where we don't have U.S. dollars or euros or Chinese rial anymore. We have one international monetary system, and it's not a central bank owned by the banks. It's a system that is controlled by each nation, and they fit into this international banking system. So I think common identity, common currency, and I think we're going to have to develop a international language. And I'm not really good at international languages. I've had a couple years of German in college and a couple years of Spanish in high school. But to be honest, I don't think I could even find the bathroom in any country right now using those language skills. So I'm not really good at that, but I don't think we can bring it forward that the international language has to be English. I think it has to be a language that's worked out, and over 20, 30, 40 years, it's taught in schools around the world. And I know that there's a couple international languages that have been proposed, and some of them don't look, any more difficult than English or Spanish or French, and they can blend the languages. I like that idea. Why can't we have a language that blends as many languages as possible? But we need to be able to communicate, and I've had that problem. I've landed in airports in countries and nobody spoke English, and I found the milk in the grocery stores and where to buy the cereal. But it's difficult, and I think we need to have sort of an international language, but still protect and preserve the national languages as well as the national cultures. There's no reason we have to have one culture. We can have a very diverse culture, but we have to have some things in common. Then the one area that I think we're not doing very well in, and that is if you have 240 countries and they're all sovereign, and I believe they need to be sovereign, but you have to have some kind of government agency that brings them together in a global way. And we have the United Nations, which theoretically has that ability to do it, But I'm sorry, we just see so much corruption in that system where nations are taking advantage of having their people with huge salaries and they're not really doing anything. And then we have on the other side nations that jeopardize funding by not paying their share. And the worst discrepancy we have in the United Nations is that we have a Security Council where 5 countries have the veto power. And we see time and time again bills come up to the UN that get stopped in the Security Council because one country doesn't like the wording of it. I don't think we can have an international civilization with a representative government and have that Security Council set up that way. I think they have to rotate. I know countries can rotate every 5 years or 10 years, but nobody should have the right to veto. And I know right away the United States said, well, we're not going to be a part of that. If we don't have the ability to veto anything we don't like, we're not going to belong to it. And that's the problem, We have to get past that. We have to recognize that all countries are equal in that sense of having a right to belong and vote. And one country doesn't have more power than other countries. So we have to get through that issue. And I think that would be a difficult issue for the United States as well as it would be for Russia and China and France and Britain. But I think it's doable. And I don't see how we can move forward or advance this civilization to a level 6, as I've suggested in the last one, without coming to this kind of realization and perspective that all countries have to be equally involved and have an equal vote. And then I think the other issue is we have a UN forces that, peacekeeping forces that go out into countries when there's a conflict. But I think we need to agree to put more funding and more expertise into a UN peacekeeping force and decrease the kind of regional forces that we have and national forces that we have operating today. I don't see how we can have a NATO and not create problems, in the future. That whole idea is creating conflict, and on their argument they say it's creating safety, but to be honest, it looks to me like they create conflicts and they create dissension among countries, and terrible amount of expenditures are going into that. So the overall goal would be to reduce the number of nuclear weapons. There's no logical reason to have any country with nuclear weapons. I think a peacekeeping force of the United Nations or some new global representing, I don't know what you'd call it, but somehow we have to get to a level where the nuclear weapons are not in the individual countries and they're controlled by the United Nations or this central entity. And the nuclear weapons would be used not for war against each other, but they'd be used for scenarios where an asteroid was coming in and maybe there was some ability to shoot a rocket out there and change its course. That makes some sense. But it doesn't make any sense that we would continue to have nuclear weapons in 6, 8, 10 different countries and not knowing what might happen tomorrow if one of those would go off accidentally, or an ICBM would take off by itself sometime and cause an international third world war. And we're talking about being rational and reasonable, and we're talking about moving to a higher civilization. That has to be recognized, that we don't have weapons of mass destruction. And that's not just nuclear weapons, it's chemical, biological warfare. We know that countries are still developing those and still using them. That has to stop. And I think this international peace highway could be a force to move us in that direction. Now, the biggest thing that I think that could be an advantage to the future in this peace highway is that it's going to need some very advanced technology from companies that now develop technologies for war profits. Okay, follow me. I'm suggesting that we have wars like the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War and the Vietnam War, not for international security reasons, which they argue that's, why we got involved in them. These are wars of profits. And the companies that are involved in making those profits and supporting the military, they want those profits to continue. So they don't want a short war. They don't want wars that kill a lot of our own soldiers. They just want a war that they spend a lot of money on aircraft and naval kinds of strategies, and they go through a lot of bullets, so they have to buy more bullets. It's that kind of strategy, and it's huge. I mean, in Iraq and Afghanistan, we had over 110,000 companies involved, and individual contracts making everything from their socks to their breakfast to their tents to to the bullets. So it's a huge enterprise, and it's a huge special interest group, and it's turning out a cycle of violence that's just going to continue. I don't know how you can see that any differently. And the only way that that's going to move to something more peaceful, and that's why I call it the peace highway, is to offer those companies involved in profits for war an opportunity to move into this field of generating the new technologies for peaceful use. Okay, that's the logic here. And I think the companies that are involved in, making our aircraft and making our missiles and the same ones involved in our space program, this would be an opportunity for them to basically make, billions and billions of dollars, clear into the future. This kind of operation would go on for potentially thousands of years. So if you take the profits out of war and give them the opportunity to go to these companies to make profits for peace, why wouldn't they? And if they don't want to voluntarily do that, I think the people, through the voting, have to come to that conclusion. Otherwise, you're going to have the military taking over the U.S. I was in a class in the 70s where a lieutenant just came out of the War College, and he was boasting about how they looked at every kind of scenario you could imagine. So, I just asked him how long would it take the military to take over here in the United States, and without even hesitation, he said 3 seconds. Jolted me, and I thought, what can they do in 3 seconds? But he had an answer for that, which scared me. And I think that's true any time. The United States is very vulnerable for that kind of takeover if they don't like what's going on. And what they don't like is, to be told that they can't go to war and make money. So I think we have to come up with a strategy that does give them this opportunity. In fact, I think peace can be far more profitable than war has ever been. And without the kind of violence, without the kind of conflict that it creates worldwide. And I see an opportunity for the big banks to make money in this. I don't see why they can't be involved in this investment. But I don't want those people to control it. I don't want those people to own it. I think it has to be owned by the people. It has to be owned by the employees. And I think it has to develop globally. In the 70s, about 1978, I sent out letters to embassies all over the world, and I proposed that we, start looking at this kind of idea. And to be honest, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, most of my students thought that this was a real harebrained idea. It hasn't been until the last 5 years that students have all, switched on that. I now get some very supportive kinds of ideas from students that look into this seriously. One this last semester said, tell me how I can be involved. So, that's been changing over the last 40 or 50 years. The technology is changing. I think it's very possible to have this technology. We could start tomorrow if we wanted to in developing the technologies. So we could get these companies involved. But in 1978 when I wrote, I actually had countries like Jordan, Saudi Arabia, wrote back and said, keep us posted. This is something that could really help. And that's how I basically pitched it. If you had a pipeline that was coming across the Middle East, which has been proposed many times, and because of the conflicts, they've just never been able to put it together for petroleum products. But if you had a transportation system that was going underground and you came up to the Jerusalem area, the East Jerusalem, and then it divided out, that's going to make Jerusalem a huge trading port again, similar to what we saw in the Roman times. And it's going to create millions and millions of jobs. And I don't see any reason why, we couldn't develop whole new cities along this route to accommodate, to hire, to give jobs to millions of Palestinians. And that might be, in the areas that they are now, but it could be that, negotiations with Egypt would give them some of the Sinai Peninsula, and, you could have giant warehousing facilities there underground, and you could employ millions of Palestinians, and they could then eventually have their own sovereign state, and it might go up to the Gaza Strip, and, there's things that could be worked out here if we could provide jobs and income and security and safe communities for millions of people. And then as you come down through North Africa, I could see that the Egyptian area would be another huge marketing center where all of the tubes come together from Africa, and I could see that we could stabilize North Africa and all of the countries in Central Africa with this new enterprise and jobs. And quite honestly, what I'm projecting is that every place you have an exit, you have the opportunity for a new community. And the communities might start off small, 2, 4, 5,000, but they should all have the potential to grow to maybe 200,000. I would rather not see, 2 million and 10 million, in population and structures that go up 100 stories. I really think that architecture is crazy. And I think, the other thing that we're doing is spreading out. Everybody wants 5 acres of land. That's not possible. I think these new communities could be very compact, very diverse, very self-sustaining, and everybody there has a job. Everybody there has a home. Everybody there has health care, education, retirement benefits, and they feel like they belong. But it also gives them the opportunity to move to another community. And I would say that there's potential there for 25,000 new communities in the next 50 years. So do the math. That's 5 billion people. By 2050, we could have 10 billion people. Half of the people on Earth could live in this peace highway, peace village system of cities. And they all could have jobs. They could all have a quality of life that's far above where they're at now. We could have no wars going on. We could have zero reason for the kind of terrorism that we see, which is almost always related to economic conditions in an area. It's not, a coincidence that you have your countries with the lowest per capita income producing the most militants. It's just, it goes hand in hand. So if everybody's employed, everybody's basically secure in their community, we have families that are secure, I don't see that we have to continue the kind of the violence, the terrorism, the wars that we are today. And that's why it's called the Peace Highway. And if we could get up to 5 billion people in 50 years, that would be phenomenal. And I would think it would balance out what's happening on our planet. I don't see any problem in having 10 billion people on the planet if we can take care of them. And I'm suggesting that that's our responsibility. If we're going to develop the technology and the ability to accommodate 10 billion people, we have to find a way for them to be able to live and have the same opportunities of prosperity and good health as the next person. Okay, so the Peace Highway is a new idea, and not an entirely new idea, but it's an idea that I would like to bring forward. I think it's an idea that's central to the new independent party. It's in all of the websites. It's been there since I got interested in pushing this new idea of having an independent party. And the new independent party is a party that could be in 240 countries. So I see that continuity of having a new party and an international party. We don't have that kind of a political structure in the world today. I mean, the Green Party is an attempt at that, but here would be an attempt where we'd have, pretty much the same philosophical, same political ideals transpiring around the world. And I think it would be kind of neat to get into a car and push some buttons and go 200 miles an hour wherever you wanted to. I could see it influencing what we think about time. For many years I proposed that instead of working 5 days and having 2 days off, which is not enough time to really, gear down and come back up, I would recommend that we change the calendar. Instead of having some months with 28 days and some with 31, that we have every month with 30 days. And the month of December, the last month, having 36 or 35 days, and then you'd have different packages of how you wanted to work. I would like to work 20 days straight and take 10 days off each month, and you could do that with this kind of transportation system. When your 10 days came up, you could get an international transit ticket, and you could get into one of these capsules and go anywhere. And you could have students that do that. They study for 20 days, and then they get into a small group, and maybe they want to go to central China or Mongolia and study the cultures there, and then the next month they want to go to France, and the next month they want to go to Bolivia. That's possible with this kind of transit system. I'm seeing that the cost could come down to pennies per mile. So there's all kinds of benefits, and it would influence the world, I think, in some new ways that would all be beneficial. So give me some feedback on it. I would like to see us be able to have tickets to ride the new transportation system in my lifetime. You're going to have to help me to get that done, but I think it's very possible with your help. Okay? Thank you.